Okay, so thank you everyone for attending this session today. It's part 2 of the initial session that we held in June or so. And I appreciate that not everyone here today was actually on the previous workshop. But what we're doing is we're not tackling brain dumps, because I don't believe just providing questions and answers will serve anyone any good, because when you sit the exam, you'll need to understand why the wrong answers aren't correct and why the right answer is correct. That's number one. And number two, when you attend an interview, you'll need to actually be able to explain what some of these tools are, or you'll need to be able to answer any scenario posed questions that you might be asked. So just practicing brain dumps and telling you this is the answer to this or this is the answer to that doesn't really help. So what we're tackling is someone's previous attempt on the website, on the ISC2 website, of the questions that are available to anyone that registers for the exam. On the other hand, I'm due to sit down, once I've settled back into my house, I'm due to sit down and prepare a slide deck of the entire syllabus of the CC exam. And then I'll run a full workshop of the actual syllabus. But I haven't got to that point yet because I've been in a bit of in between homes. So I'll do that later. And so hopefully by September or October, I'll deliver a full workshop. Now, let's take a look at question number 45. The question is, inbound traffic from an internal source seems to indicate much higher rates of communication than normal. So there seems to be a lot more communication than normal coming into the organization, to the point where the internal systems might be overwhelmed. And it's now asking the question, which security solution can often identify where this inbound traffic is coming from and potentially counter this risk? Now, the solution, of course, is a firewall. What a firewall does is that you configure it to block outbound traffic. You can say that all traffic going out on SMTP port 25, which is your email port, should be blocked. And what that would mean is that users wouldn't be able to send outbound emails. So a firewall you can use to block outbound traffic, and you can also use it to identify traffic coming in to a particular port. You can also use it to block traffic coming in via a particular port. You've actually got on your system, on your laptop that you're using to access this session, if you're using a laptop or a desktop, you've actually got a Windows firewall software solution there. And whilst you may not have configured it personally, whenever you install something like an antivirus that doesn't actually come with your laptop, you may be asked the question, do you want to configure do you want to allow this software to come through on port XYZ of your system? So port 80, for example, TCP/IP traffic, TCP traffic. Port 443, that's for SSL traffic. So you know where you have those secure sockets layer or TLS websites that are secure with that yellow padlock. That travels from port 443 of your network. So if port 443 is disabled on your firewall, you wouldn't be able to access secure websites, encrypted websites. So that's how ports work, and that's how firewalls work. So for this question, it's asking which security solution can identify traffic that is coming in that seems to be higher than usual, at a higher rate than usual, and which which solution can actually counter the risk as well. It's a firewall because you can use it to identify which port the traffic is coming in on, and then you can also use it to block the port as well. That's why firewall is the answer there. So here it says firewalls can often identify hostile inbound traffic and potentially counter it. And B and D are incorrect because these are physical controls. A turnstile is a physical control. That is one of those things that when you go into a building, you can be going into your server room, you can be going into a building, and you all have to go in one by one and the door rotates. So that is a physical control. Your anti-malware, that isn't necessarily a physical control, but that is not usually effective at communicating, at countering communications attacks, because you can't use antivirus to counter. It's not as effective as countering traffic that is coming in and attempting to overwhelm your network or your internet solution. Does anyone know, can anyone type within the chat window, please, what an attack may be referred to whereby a lot of traffic is just coming into your network all of a sudden over the internet? You're just getting hammered by traffic. Can anyone actually identify what sort of attack that is in the... Okay, let's see in the chat window. Perfect. Yes, a DDoS attack. Thanks, Princess. That is a DDoS attack. So a firewall could help to counter a DDoS attack. Once you identify what ports that traffic is coming in on, you can immediately disable that port to block traffic that is coming in. And so a DDoS attack, that is an attack whereby a cyber criminal or multiple cyber criminals try to send traffic to a corporate website to stop legal traffic or lawful traffic from actually traveling through that network, through the internet. What sort of organizations may face a higher risk of a DDoS attack? And that is an exam question, by the way, but this is just a question, just for us to understand what a DDoS attack is. What sort of organizations might face a higher risk of a DDoS attack? I'll check the chat window again. Okay, so we've named an airline, we've named a company. I won't name that company, but what sort of company is that company? That's what I was trying to say, but that is correct there. A security outfit, not quite, but someone has named, Abby has named a company, but what sort of company is that? Online retailer or an e-commerce company, perfect. They're more likely to face a DDoS attack because a cyber criminal that targets such a company will reap more havoc. They'd reap more havoc than if they just target a single small security outfit. Also banks. And there's another sort of organization that could experience a DDoS attack that would affect millions of people. What sort of organization is that? Cyber experts here may be able to guess this easily. What sort of organization would also be highly likely to, or a high target of a DDoS attack? So we've recognized, yes, online retailers or e-commerce companies. We've heard the health sector, but there is one particular sector that is more likely to experience: social organization, utilities. Yep, utilities, but there is still a specific sector that I'm looking for that starts with a C. Starts with a C. Power, we've heard utilities, we've heard power, social organizations, we've heard health, but there is a specific type of organization that starts with a C that some of us here as cyber or information technology professionals may have actually worked within? Starts with a C. No, not a financial company. We've mentioned financial services. No, not that. No, no. I'll just leave us with another minute to ponder on that, to think about that. It starts with a C and it's an obvious sort of organization, not communications, that cyber criminals would permanently and constantly be trying to bring down constantly, because they know that if they bring such an organization down, it would affect millions of customers over the world. Nope, that's a good guess. Crypto, but not crypto. A DDoS attack? Against what sort of company? And I'm sure that when I say that, a lot of us will say, oh, yes, because if you're interested in cybersecurity, if you're interested in infrastructure, IT, then you definitely know about this. No, it's not a chat group. Okay, I'll just let us know. I'll put us out of our, anxiety here. It's actually cloud service providers, cloud solution providers. They are at a high risk of a DDoS attack, because cyber criminals know that they serve millions of customers. So cloud service providers. Does that make sense to us? And now let's go to the next question. So, and this we've already answered actually. So Ludwig is a security analyst at Trifid Inc. and notices network traffic that might indicate an attack designed to affect the availability of the environment. Which of the following might be the attack that Ludwig sees? And we've already discussed that, so no need to actually discuss that again. It is a distributed denial of service attack. What is a DDoS attack compared to a DOS attack, a denial of service attack? A DDoS attack is whereby a load of systems are configured to attack a single network, to send traffic from multiple systems to a single network. So let's say we've got a cloud services provider, or cloud solutions provider, that offers cloud services to millions of customers across the world. And we've got this network of criminals in a particular country. They could take over multiple systems across the world and then send traffic through those multiple systems to this single cloud service provider, just to try and deny availability of those systems to the cloud solution provider's customers. That is a distributed denial of service attack, because they're using multiple systems. They've taken over multiple systems around the globe, and they've now configured those systems to constantly send out traffic to the cloud services provider to try and bring it down. That is a distributed denial of service attack. Whereas the denial of service attack, without the other D, without the distribution, is actually a service attack whereby one system sends loads of traffic out to another system, and a cloud solution provider's system, for example, to try and bring down that system. So that is a denial of service attack versus a distributed denial of service attack. What is wiring? So wiring is a common term. That is where wiring what? What is a common term? Meaning a place where wires and conduits are often run and where equipment can be placed in order to facilitate the use of your local network or your LAN. That is a bracket. Wiring is placed in a bracket. Wiring is placed in a bracket and run round the office or even run round our homes. It's referred to as a bracket. to facilitate the use of a local network. But I must say now that feedback that I've received from some people that have tackled this exam is that the simple one-line questions are few and far between. Whereas some people have said that they've just had a very easy ride, but a few others have come back and said actually that they were asking quite a few scenario questions. So which common cloud service model only offers the customer access to a given application? And that is software as a service. So software as a service offers access to a single application or a given application. Can anyone type in the chat window, please, what an example of a software as a service app is? Can anyone type in the chat window what a software as a service app is? And most of us actually use one form of software as a service, or SaaS, or the other. Let's just take a look. Microsoft, what's that? Microsoft. Okay, so have we heard of Office 365? So that is software as a service because you're not actually installing that product on your system. Some of us actually, yes, fantastic. Yeah, I understand that's what you meant, but I was trying to differentiate between buying Word or buying Microsoft Office and installing it on your laptop as opposed to paying an annual subscription for Office 365. Some of us are used to still buying Office or Word, or what Word, I don't know what version of Word is out there, but some of us are used to still buying just a version of Word and then installing it on our computer. Whereas Office 365 is a software as a service solution that we actually lease, and we pay a yearly subscription for it. How many of us in the chat window actually pay a subscription, an annual fee for our Microsoft Office solution on our laptops, on our home laptops now? Can we just show our hands, please? How many of us actually pay a yearly subscription versus how many of us actually, so if you pay a yearly subscription for your Office, put your hands up, just do a hands up. And if you pay a, if you've got it installed locally on your computer, then just do a thumbs down. So thank you, I've seen one thumbs up. If you actually pay a yearly rental, a yearly subscription, thumbs up. And if you have installed it locally on your PC, then thumbs down. Okay, so there we go. So at least one person has it installed locally on their PC, and that means that that is not software as a service because they've purchased the license outright. But the many of us that are actually paying a subscription, we're actually leasing it as a service. What is platform as a service? Now, this is where organizations tend to lease a platform, and then you pay a subscription fee to their platform, such as Netflix. Netflix is an example of a platform as a service because you're leasing their product and they lease from the cloud provider the platform to provide us with the services that we lease. Infrastructure as a service is when a company leases hardware, where they back up all their systems to, they lease the hardware, they lease the routers in the cloud, they lease the firewalls, they lease, this is the hardware-based firewalls now, and everything that they can, infrastructure. But remember the difference between software as a service and software that is licensed to you. When we're looking at ensuring availability for a data center, it is best to plan for both resilience and what of the elements in the facility. And I won't show us the answer to this. So that is the answer that this person selected. But what is it best that we plan for when we're ensuring availability for a data center? So let's put in the chat window, please, our answer, what we think we should be planning for. Yes, redundancy. Thank you to everyone that's answered that. Resilience and redundancy. It's best that we plan for those. So availability is enhanced by ensuring that we have everything in our cloud replicated across multiple sites, across multiple instances, so that if one server, for example, were to go down, then we've got a redundant or backup server in the cloud or somewhere else. So resilience and redundancy. And I think that one of the things that we need to also recognize is that whilst everyone is talking about wanting to go into cybersecurity, we often don't actually appreciate that there are so many areas in cybersecurity that are lacking, people that want to work there. Everyone wants to go in and start configuring routers or configuring firewalls, whereas there are many roles for incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity, operational resilience that are unfilled. So when you're looking at considering, this exam and other exams that you may want to take in the future, remember that it's not just about information security or cyber security and all the technical areas. You can have a successful career in a non-technical role in information resilience or cyber risk. So please remember that. Which of the following activities is usually part of the configuration management process, but is also extremely helpful in countering potential attacks? So how can annual budgeting help to counter potential attacks? How can conferences with senior leadership help to counter potential attacks? Updating and patching our systems is the best way that we can actually stop cyber attacks against our organizations and against our personal systems. One of the things that we often tend to do is that we tend to turn off the pop-up that says about to patch systems. Do you want to suspend this or delay this for 24 hours? And then we quickly click on delay for 24 hours or delay for 2 days, delay for 3 days, not recognizing that within that time window, our system could be compromised. A 0-day malware could infect our systems, or even some malware that the vendor might have been talking about for a long time and advising everyone to patch your systems, patch your systems, patch your systems. Yet even in some organizations, they'll put off from the patch and they'll say, okay, we'll do that next week, or we'll do that because we can't submit a change request on time. And in the meantime, the system's go unpatched and become infected. So we just need to make sure that if we're in a role where we're required to be hands-on, or even in a risk role or resilience role, we need to be asking questions such as how frequently do we patch our systems? And at home, we don't turn off that button that says automatic updates. Although, may I ask us a question here, for those of us who may have actually worked in an IT environment, why might it be sometimes a good idea in the workplace now to delay patching or to not turn on automatic patching on servers? Why might that be a good idea? To sometimes not turn on automatic patching. So I'll just look in the chat window. Yep, running vulnerability scans. But why might it, so I've asked the question, why might it not be a good idea to apply security patches or to apply patches straight away without testing them? Enna said because the server might be in use, but Tonya has given me the right answer: to avoid bug or compatibility issues. You're right, because sometimes a fix may be released that actually is incompatible with the applications that are running on that server. Because Microsoft, for example, when they release their patches, they don't know what applications you're running on your server. They don't know what applications you're running on your system, on your laptop at home. But they release this critical patch. And if on all the servers in the workplace, they're switched on to automatically update, then there could be issues, of course. There could be issues because the update, the patch, may actually disrupt business because it's incompatible with some application that has already been installed on that server that is working, serving the business. So you're all correct there. But updating and patching systems is important. And once in a while, a company may have to apply an emergency patch without testing it. They may need to apply an emergency patch, having considered the risk, and then they test after they've applied the patch. Okay, what is a device that filters network traffic in order to enhance overall security performance? What is that device? So the firewall filters network traffic. We've talked about that previously. What is the name of the tool that opens and closes to allow traffic through on a firewall? It starts with a P, and I've mentioned it previously. What is the name of the thing that opens and closes and can be configured to close or to open on a firewall? Yes, it's a port. Thank you. So what you need to do, please, for this exam as well, is to just go and identify the common ports. There are some common port numbers, like DNS port 21, and that is a critical port. Port 443, that is where your SSL traffic comes through. Then you've got other ports. HTTP, that is your port 80. HTTPS, sorry, that is where your SSL traffic comes through. HTTPS port 443. So if those ports are shut, if port 443 is shut on the firewall, whether that's on your local firewall, on your home laptop or your business laptop, or it's shut on the business router, then traffic going to HTTPS. When you type in your HTTPS or whatever to go to Amazon, or even if you type in Amazon, you'll be blocked because port 443 has been blocked on the firewall. Now, what is a VLAN? A virtual LAN. What is a VLAN? That is a local area network, a virtual local area network that is used to segment logical traffic. It uses logical mechanisms to segment network traffic. So it doesn't use secret. There's nothing such as secret mechanisms. A VLAN or virtual LAN doesn't use physical methods. So you don't actually go and take your network and you put a physical device in between the networks. And there's nothing such as regulated methods of segmenting. So it's a logical method. So they use things like your subnets and subnet masking. They divide the network into subnets into subnetworks. Let me use the word subnetworks using logical methods, including subnet masking. Now, the concept that the deployment of multiple types of controls provides better security than using a single type of control. What is that referred to as? The answer to that is defense in depth. But let's take a look at the wrong answers. What is a VPN, a virtual private network? Can anyone who's been reading for this exam tell me what a VPN is, please? A virtual private network. Okay, thanks for that, Toyi. But what's a virtual private network now? Virtual private network?
Virtual private network. Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, thank you. I didn't know that people could unmute themselves, but yes, let's actually say what a virtual private network is.
Yeah, okay. Virtual private network is a network in which users is a network whereby users can be able to use the network outside the environment. It's a secured network in which users are given access to come in outside the network.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much, and that is and that is really good. Thank you. And I've also got Tony who said that it's the ability to connect to your HQ via secure remote connections. So both of you are correct there. What happens with a virtual private network is that and so I'll use the term VPN from now on. If you work for a company, they may have installed a VPN software on your computer. And that VPN software provides a secure tunnel of communication from your router, from your laptop device to the company's network. So any traffic, once you log on and that VPN software is activated, any communications between your laptop and your work network will go through that encrypted tunnel. So the tunnel, the virtual private network is actually encrypted so that if anyone were to try to intercept the traffic in between your laptop at home and the network computer, they wouldn't be able to read that traffic because the tunnel itself is encrypted. They wouldn't be able to actually access that tunnel because it's actually encrypted. The data is scrambled. So a virtual private network provides a secure encrypted tunnel between a home user's PC and the office network. So both of you are correct there. Thank you. Now, what is the principle of least privilege? So for anyone who's just joined here, what is the principle of least privilege? What is that? Least privilege. Least privilege is where you make sure that you give every single user that accesses the network the least privileges or permissions that they need to do their job. You don't give them any more privileges or rights of access than they actually need. That is the principle of least privilege. Internet is not a security control. But now let's look at the question. The concept that the deployment of multiple types of controls provides better security than using a single type of control is what? And I've told you what VPN means, or least privilege, but the answer here is defense in depth. Defense in depth is where you apply multiple layers of controls, multiple types of controls. So you don't only say that users should access the network using a username and password. What might you actually apply as a further security control to actually employ defense in depth? Besides a username and password, what else might you need to deploy for defense in depth? Lowest amount of access, having access to just enough the user needs to get their works done, so thank you. What sort of controls might you need to apply if you're considering defense in depth? Thank you. Multi-factor authentication, which could include biometrics, could include tokens, could include anything. Yep, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. So all of these follow the principle of defense in depth, one-time passwords as well. So I'm just trying to make sure that we actually understand the reasons why some of these questions or some of these responses are wrong. A tool that monitors local devices to reduce potential threats from hostile software is what? Is that a network-based intrusion detection system, anti-malware, data loss prevention, or a firewall? Now, can we put our answers in the chat window, please? Network-based intrusion detection system, anti-malware, data loss prevention, or a firewall? What is a tool that monitors local devices to reduce potential threats from hostile software? Network-based intrusion detection system. Someone has said, everyone said network-based intrusion detection system. Any other answers? Any other answers? Why is the network-based intrusion detection system not the answer? That's why I said why, because I was pretty surprised. Okay, so Tony actually said, yes, that is B. Why is, what is a network-based intrusion detection system? Can anyone write in the chat window or describe a network-based intrusion detection system? So not a host-based intrusion detection system, which usually sits on the local devices anyway. Host-based local device, host-based network, host-based intrusion detection system, IDS or IPS, would actually sit on your local devices. Whereas your network-based intrusion detection systems, they're things that will sit on the network devices, such as on the routers. They're your firewalls, etc. But what is a NID? What is an example of a NID? A work on traffic on the network. Not sure I understand what you're saying there. But maybe you're saying works on traffic on the network. Network-based intrusion detection systems don't actually work on the local devices. Data loss prevention, that doesn't work to reduce threat from hostile software, but it's your anti-malware. What is anti-malware? So anti-malicious software. Malware stands for malicious software. What sort of anti-malware software can you have on your local devices? In the chat window, please. What sort of anti-malware software can we have on our local devices? Okay, yes, but give us examples, thank you, of anti-malware that runs on the local devices. Okay, we've given the name of an endpoint solution, but I'm looking for, simple things, such as antivirus, anti-ransomware. Those are the sort of anti-malware solutions that run on your local devices rather than on your network devices, rather than on your routers, on your switches, etc. Okay, which common cloud deployment model typically features only a single customer's data functionality stored on specific systems and hardware? Is that public cloud, private cloud, community cloud, or hybrid cloud? Let's take a look at this. Thank you. So which common cloud deployment model typically features a single customer's data functionality stored on specific systems, hardware? Public, private, community, hybrid. B? Are we all sure it's B? Okay, let's not go on for too long with that. Yes, it is B, basically. Public cloud is the shared cloud model. Shared cloud, if you use Office 365, if you use iCloud, if you use Google Cloud, your Google Drive, etc., that's actually in a public cloud. Private cloud, some organizations may actually deploy their applications to a private cloud rather than want to share their cloud facilities with other organizations. Then you've got the community cloud. You may have something for all schools, like in a foundation. We've got an organization called, well, I won't name them, but they've got a foundation and they've got a network of schools across the UK. So they have a single network in the cloud, and that is referred to as a community cloud. And then we've now got the hybrid cloud, which is where an organization decides to have a private network and a public cloud network as well. A device typically accessed by multiple users, often intended for a single purpose, such as managing email or web pages, is what? That is a server. A server is typically accessed by multiple users. So even in the cloud, an organization's data, if it's in the private cloud, for example, would be stored on a single drive, on a single server, and then multiple users access that. If your organization doesn't have or isn't in the cloud, if their data isn't in the cloud, then their data may be in a data center, or it may be in the basement, in a server room. But the device on which everyone's data is stored, like everyone's emails, could be stored on an Exchange server or BlackBerry server. Then you could have your databases that you access. Those would be stored on a server, a database server. And then you have your file servers. So that is referred to as a server, a device typically accessed by multiple users, often intended for a single purpose. Okay. So when you actually do these practice exams on the ISC2 site, please take a look at the reasons for which some answers are wrong. Don't just read through the correct answers. It's so important that you understand why those answers are wrong, because they could then be the right answer to another question that you may get in the live exam. Cheryl is browsing the web. Which of these protocols is she probably using? Is she using Simple Network Management Protocol, which is used to manage the routers? FTP, file transfer protocol, which is used to transfer documents, large documents especially. Or is she using trivial file transfer protocol, which is again used to TFTP, used to transfer documents? Or is she using HTTP? HTTP, of course, is what we use to browse the internet. What is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS, please? Anyone have any answers for that? Difference between HTTP and HTTPS? Yes, S is for secured browsing. So S is for secured browsing. That means that traffic, that website is encrypted, basically. So at less risk of being compromised. And if you access a web server on an e-commerce website, for example, then you'll find that the traffic between your computer and that e-commerce website is also secure. Using what? Okay, so we've said 80 is unsecured and 443 is secure. That is perfect. Thanks to you for that. Let me ask another question. What protocol do we use to secure traffic on port 443? HTTPS traffic. What protocols do we use? SSL, thank you. And what is the most secure protocol used for securing HTTPS traffic? Oh, fantastic. Yeah, TLS 1.3. So you're even up to date with the version TLS 1.3. That is the most secure version. So SSL is good, but TLS 1.3 is the most up-to-date secure protocol used to secure websites, to encrypt traffic on websites. Your banks will also use that. E-commerce systems, the military, they would use encryption all the time. Yep, and that would provide, you'd need to get a TLS certificate. I've done a workshop, and so what I'm trying to do is that when I've got the time, I'm really trying to, rather than rewrite the slides that I've produced previously for a different course, Information Security Management Principles, I'm going to actually rewrite those slides and just add to them for this workshop, so that for those of you who didn't log in before 5 or before 6 rather, I mentioned that I would try and deliver a full workshop on this rather than a question and answer session in the future. But I just need to get my slides up to date. But for the purpose of what we're discussing today, if you want to go and view the previous syllabus that I delivered on Information Security Management Principles, I've heard that that covers about 70% of this syllabus, but they're very long. But there are things on encryption which I've kept separate. So you can go and view those on the Ladder Back Down's website if you'd like to view them. Which type of fire suppression system is typically the least expensive? And water is typically the least expensive. That's why water is used. Fire engines, they carry a lot of water. That is one of the most common chemicals, and it is the least expensive. Okay. Which of the following is not a typical benefit of cloud computing services? So again, remember that we're just tackling a paper that somebody has provided me with, where they've initially gone onto the website without having studied any of this previously, and they've simply just highlighted answers so that they could quickly finish and then just get the correct answers. So which of the following is not a typical benefit of cloud computing services? Not a benefit. So let's read those 4 options, and it's not A. So let's just read those 4 options and see which of these is not a typical benefit of cloud computing services. Not. Guesses, please. Thank you. Thanks. So thank you for changing your response there. Yep, and it's D. Definitely D. D is not a benefit. You don't have freedom from legal constraints. You don't have freedom from legal obligations. If you outsource your data to the cloud, you are still accountable for that data as a company. Your company is still accountable, not actually as a company. The board is still accountable for any breaches. So outsourcing does not bring a freedom from legal constraints. Now let's go now. Which type of fire suppression system is typically the safest for humans? That is water as well. An Internet of Things device is typified by its effect on or use of the what environment? The physical environment. Because if we think about it, even though you have your Internet of things like smart meter, your smart this, your smart that, it's still used in your physical environment. So have some interaction with the physical realm. Refrigerators, your smart lights, your smart bulbs, smart cameras. Okay, the section of the IT environment that is closest to the external world where we locate IT systems that communicate with the internet. Now, this question, and I'd like us to actually understand this as well. The answer is the DMZ, demilitarized zone. What is a DMZ, please? Can anyone tell us what that is? What is a DMZ? Any responses? Or should I explain? Now, what a DMZ is that in an organization, you have your, yes, okay, yep. So you've typed that quickly. Thank you, Isiaka. Where you situate your servers that communicate externally. Where you situate your servers that need to be accessed by external users. Now let's ask the question, what sort of servers might need to be accessed by external users? Can we give some examples, please, in the chat window that communicate externally? Yes, so I just want to dig a bit deeper into that expression. What sort of servers might need to be accessed externally by users? Yep, okay, but let's give examples here. Thank you, Toyin. Let's see your web server. What sort of things on your web server? Place in the DMZ. Okay, let's first of all talk about a corporate organization. Give us one name, one server that may need to be accessed by the majority of users, by the majority of employees from their homes or on the bus, let's say. Tell me one system that is commonly accessed and the name of the application. The email server, what is the name of the most common application that is accessed by users? The application now. Let's take a look at the application so that we understand this. We're correct. We're talking in the right direction. We're heading in the right direction here, but I'm just looking to make sure that we understand. Okay, so from a business perspective, your employees would most likely, if they use Microsoft Exchange, they would most likely need to access Outlook web access. And so your Exchange server would need to be configured to allow Outlook web access, access from the internet, access from people's homes, access from, you know, people roaming about on the buses or whatever. However, that server would need to be placed in the DMZ. And then anything outside of the DMZ would have additional firewalls around it to protect it from access externally. Whereas when their employees are now inside the business, they can access those systems. Database providing certain content. So thank you, because I was just going to ask, thank you, FL, because I was just going to ask another question. What sort of systems might an e-commerce company need to place in the DMZ? Now, what sort of systems might a large, you know, online retailer need to place in the DMZ? And what sort of systems might it need to place behind the DMZ with additional protection? So think of the ordering process from an online retailer. What sort of systems may need to be placed in the DMZ? Any responses? What sort of systems might an online retailer? Yeah, products. So your products may need to be placed in the, catalog as well. Yeah, so you're using the correct words now here. The products database to allow customers to browse through the different products that are on offer would need to be placed in the DMZ. So that is perfectly correct. The catalog server, yep, all of that's placed in the DMZ. But what sort of servers may need to be placed behind the DMZ? And by the way, that DMZ is still on the LAN. It's just that those servers are published externally for external access as well. But what sort of servers in the ordering process may need to be placed outside of the DMZ and kept secure with additional firewalls and additional protection? Now, what sort of servers for an online retailer? What sort of servers for an online retailer? Okay, so let's say a customer logs in to browse for items with an online retailer. They check through on the items, then they want to pay. Of course, their credit card servers, their payment systems would need to be behind the DMZ, because that's not for everyone to have access to that system. So the payment server would be behind the DMZ, whereas the products database system would be in the DMZ. I've heard or just read a question, where am I getting these questions from? So just a reminder that these are questions that are readily available on ISC Square's website, open to all candidates that want to sit the exam. And so I'm just working through somebody who has possibly sat the exam, or they haven't sat the exam, but at least they've tried this exam online. And then they provided me with their paper to go through with everyone. And so some of the answers that they've selected, of course, are incorrect. But we're just going through this paper, and I'm going through the right answer and the wrong answers, explaining exactly what the wrong answers mean, so that we understand that. Okay, now, what is a MAC? The MAC is the physical access address of every single network device. Every single network device, every single device that can actually be networked has got a MAC, or media access control address, within it. So if it's a smart fridge, it will have a unique MAC address. A mobile phone will have a unique MAC address, the wireless card on the mobile phone, not the mobile phone itself, but the wireless card. As long as it is a network device, then it has a unique media access control, or MAC address, a physical address. And RBAC, RBAC is a access control model. What is RBAC? What does that stand for? I said remote there, but it's not remote. What does RBAC stand for? Can anyone type in the chat window and explain what it means? So I've typed it, but I just want to see if anyone else can guess what it means. Okay, yep. So we've all, well, two of us have typed it there. Role-based access control, as I've typed there. So role-based access control, what does that mean? That means that everyone is given access to resources on the network according to their roles, rather than just given individual access to resources. So what tends to happen with RBAC is that a set of roles are created within Active Directory that IT administrators use, or IT support engineers use, to provide permissions, authorization, and permissions to resources on the network. So they create roles. Instead of giving me access to XYZ, and then giving Tony access to XYZ, and giving N access to XYZ, they create roles. They can create the role of a finance administrator. They can create the role of an IT engineer. They can create the role of an HR administrator. And then they assign me to the role of a finance administrator. And they would have already have applied different permissions, access to this, access to that, access to that, access to this finance application, access to this library, access to this document, to the finance administrator role. Now, whenever I leave or move departments, all they need to do, let's say I move to the HR administrator role, they just remove my name from that finance admin role and move me into the access admin role, HR admin role, and I automatically get those rights. It saves them having to give me rights to individual applications. And then when I move departments, they forget to remove me from one of the 10 applications or so that they've already given me permissions to. So role-based access control is not the correct answer to this. VLAN is not the correct answer. The correct answer is a DMZ, and it's not MAC, because I've explained what each of those answers actually means. By far, the most crucial element of any security instruction program is what? Now, can someone tell me the answer to this question in the chat window? What is the most crucial element of any security instruction program? Let's put that in the chat window, please. What is the most crucial element of any security program or security instruction program? Any responses, please? Any more responses? Okay, any more? Okay. Right? So we're a bit divided here, but yes, the answer is always in any information security or IT exam that you will do, the answer is always preserve health and human safety. First and foremost, because if you don't preserve health and human safety, you can't protect assets, you can't ensure the availability of IT systems if there's no humans to actually do that. So that is the most crucial element. You make sure that you're preserving health and human safety of the employees that are there to actually deliver any service to the business. Okay. Trifid Inc. wants to host streaming video files for the company's remote users, but wants to ensure the data is protected while it's streaming. Which of the following methods are probably best for this purpose? Now, what is the best method for a company to host streaming video files to send it to its remote users? Responses? So question again, Trifid wants to host streaming video files for the company's remote users, but wants to ensure that the data is protected whilst it's streaming. Which of the following methods are probably best for this purpose? Symmetric encryption, hashing, asymmetric encryption, or VLANs, virtual LANs? So we've said VLANs, and we've already discussed that. Virtual LANs, virtual local area networks, where traffic is encrypted between the remote user's device and the corporate network. So that is VLAN. So the answer to that is D. Symmetric encryption, hashing, and asymmetric encryption, all of that is explained, as I said, in the session that I did on information security management principles, but I specifically did a session from that syllabus on encryption. So part 1 and part 2, again, that's available on the YouTube channel on the Ladder Back Downs Network. And what I'll do is that when we take a brief break at 7:30, I'll actually go and get those links and post them in the chat window for us. Now, let's see who dictates policy in an organization. And this is an easy one. So I'll just say that now. It's not the security manager. It's not HR. It's senior management. It's not the auditors. Why is it senior management? Because they're accountable by law and to the regulators for what happens to the corporate assets. So that's why they're responsible for dictating policy. Okay, let's go down and take a look. What is the rest of the data code that is left behind after normal deletion procedures have been tried? What is the data that is left behind called after normal deletion procedures have been have been completed? Okay, so it's data remnants. It's data remnants. I thought that some of us would say it's data residue, but it's actually data remnants. And so what is the best procedure for deleting data that is left, that data on a disk that is no longer needed? What is the best method of deleting data to make sure that we don't leave any data behind? What is the destruction method called for deleting data on a system? What is the best way to remove data? Yep, degaussing. We can degauss to totally wipe data, and then we crush the hard drive. Very often, we tend to just wipe the drive and then we send the drive, or we throw away our old systems, including our mobile phones, without actually just totally removing all our data by resetting the factory settings if it's our phone. But when it's not our phone, when it's an office system, we degauss. We can actually purchase some software degaussers for our home PCs as well. But to totally remove the data, you use a degausser. But data remnants is what is used to describe data left behind on systems media after normal procedures, data deletion procedures have been attempted. What is one of the benefits of CBT? This is not a question that, it's just a question that is there. That is, it's scalable. Scalable. When you use computer-based training in a company, it's scalable. You can just roll it out to multiple users anywhere across your organization. Right, now, what is the name of a policy that Preetha might have been asked to sign in her company before she's allowed to use Chief's IT equipment? What is that policy called? Have we all signed one in our workplaces previously? Okay. Let's see. Yep, that is the AUP, Acceptable Use Policy. And for those of us who may not notice, when we go into our workplace, in many organizations, every single day when we log in, there's that little screen that we often click on OK to, that is a mini acceptable use policy that we're signing to say that we've read, that says you shouldn't do this on your network. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. So the AUP doesn't just exist on paper. In many organizations, it exists on our login screen. And oftentimes we just click on OK without reading it. But I would often say that it's good practice for IT, InfoSec, to update that policy on user screens, refresh it, so that someone who joined 5-10 years ago doesn't say, I forgot what the AUP said, I signed it 10 years ago. No, each day, every single day that you log onto the corporate network, you're actually reading that little AUP and you're signing to say that you agree with it. that you agree with what the corporation has said is the way that you should conduct yourself on your computer. Yes, Toyin, thank you. You say that the acceptable use policy lets you know how or what you can do on the system. You agree to only use the PC for official use and no personal use. And I agree with that to a large extent, but I've recently said to someone that sometimes an organization will say that you're allowed to use their PCs for minimal personal use. And I say, I don't use anyone's PC for personal use. I don't care whether they say minimal or not. I don't use it for any personal use. I prefer to keep my personal devices for personal use and my workplace devices for workplace use. You're going in to a business each day, you go into the office or you work from home. So even if the organization generously allows you to use their computer for minimal personal use, just don't do it. Use your phone. Okay, hashing is often used to provide what? What is hashing? What is it used to provide? What is hashing? So hashing is a form of scrambling of data. Now, what is integrity? So again, I don't think that I can cover the CIA triad tonight. If you want to get through a lot more questions than we've got to currently, the CIA triad. But what hashing is that, let's just see what answers have been put. Again, it's in the encryption thing that I've put in the videos that I've put on YouTube. But Tonya has said to verify that information has not been tampered with. And that is quite correct. So when you log in to your system in the morning and you type in your password is hashed and it's sent to an authentication server that verifies that that password is correct. So it verifies the integrity of the password that you've provided. So that is why hashing is often used to provide integrity. It's a form of encrypting and scrambling the text and then sending it on to an authentication server to ensure, to verify that the information provided is correct. So it verifies the integrity of data. That's so funny. AA has said you get a message on every logon at my place of work not to expect any privacy when using the computer. That is so funny, but it's correct. That is very funny. And the issue is that, as I said earlier, very often users will simply take it for granted and click on OK to that message in the morning, having not read it. And then you simply go along and you spend the day browsing when you don't have anything to do or sending personal messages. When in AA's case, in your place of work, it says, do not expect any privacy using this computer, using this workplace computer. So that's funny, but it's a pertinent point. Read everything that you sign and comply. Comply. So hashing is used for integrity checks. The organization should keep a copy of every signed acceptable use policy on file and issue a copy to who? Is it to the regulators? Is it to the user who signed it? Is it to lawmakers, the PRO? Who do we think a copy should be issued to? Who do we think a copy should be issued to? Yes, it should be issued to the person that signed it. That's correct. And Toyi, I would say that the company that is saying do not expect any privacy using the computer. They're not indirectly telling you that no personal usage is allowed. They're actually telling you directly, do not use our computers for personal use. Else, we are monitoring you basically. So you shouldn't expect any privacy. So there's no indirectness there. They're actually telling you directly not to do it. And I like that. So A is correct there. The user who signed a copy of an acceptable use policy should receive a copy of that. If two people want to use symmetric encryption to conduct a confidential conversation, how many keys do they need? Now, as I said, we can't go through the full symmetric and asymmetric encryption tonight, but I'll post that the two videos in a short while, the links to those which you do need to take a look at. If two people want to use symmetric encryption, they're using a single key. The single key is used to encrypt the communications sent from one party, and the single key is sent along with the message. The key and the message, the encrypted message, are then received by the recipient, and then the recipient uses the symmetric key, the same key, the single key, to decrypt the message. So symmetric encryption, a single key is used to encrypt and decrypt the message. The single key is shared along with the message, sent along with the message, with the encrypted message to the recipient. The recipient then uses the same key to decrypt the message before reading it. Can anyone tell me what the dangers are, the risks are with that method of encryption? It's fast, it's the fastest method of encryption, but what are the dangers or the risks of that, where the key is sent along with the message? Let's take a look at answers here. A man-in-the-middle attack. Someone's read on MITM. That is a man-in-the-middle attack. Yes, so what might happen? Let's not use acronyms here. What might happen? MITM, what might happen to that message? So breaking things down into basic language, a message is encrypted with a single key. The key is then sent along with the message to the recipient, who uses that single key to decrypt the message before reading it. What are the dangers there? Man in the middle might do what? Yeah, that's it. So the interception. So the man in the middle may intercept the message, and because the key is enclosed with the message, they simply use the key to decrypt the message. Yep. So the man in the middle, the cyber criminal, will simply intercept the message, could simply intercept the message, and then they use that single key to decrypt. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the recording, and then I'm going to let us take a 10-minute break for tea, and then I'm going to drop, whilst we're taking a tea break, I'm going to drop the links to the information security management principles videos in the workshop. I'll drop the playlist actually, and then I'll drop the 2 links to the encryption videos within the chat window as well. So we've answered the question, if 2 people want to use symmetric encryption, that they need to use one key. And we've talked about the risks of that, in that the key and the message could be intercepted, and then the cyber criminal has access to both the key and the message, so they could readily decrypt that. In asymmetric encryption, and I'll briefly go over this, but I've of course provided the links to a previous workshop that I've done on encryption. In asymmetric encryption, there is a private key and a public key. The private key is always held by the sender of the message, and it has to be kept private, which is why it's called a private key. A user's public key can be published on their LinkedIn profile, can be published on their website, can be published anywhere, and used to decrypt messages sent from that sender. So in asymmetric encryption, there are two keys, a private key and a public key. Let me briefly share something on a website for us. This has also been shared in the workshop that I did, of which I provided the links, on information security management principles. I believe I may have shared it in the encryption videos, but what I'll do is let me just briefly look for this website, and then I'll share this and we'll view a company's public certificate. Let's just do this in a second. Okay, so to view an organization's public key that is used to view secure messages or to access their site securely, to view their public key or their certificate, in other words, you come onto a website such as Instagram.com. Then you click on this padlock here. Once you click on the padlock, and it says that it's got a valid certificate, it says the connection is secure. That's why it's got the HTTPS, and it says that the connection is secure. And then you can view their certificate details here. Now I need to move this toolbar out of the way because it is very in the way, so I can't see. Okay, so can we see this certificate of Instagram here? It says the common name, Instagram.com, CN, and it tells us what is actually used to encrypt it. It uses SHA-256, and it tells us when the certificate or public key and private key was issued on. It was issued on May the 22nd, and it will expire on August the 22nd. So this is their public key. They will hold the private key. And this is what enables you and I to access Instagram.com securely. Our browser will have a copy of their private key, of Instagram's private key, but only they will hold a copy of their private key, rather. Our browser will store a copy of their public key, but Instagram will have a copy of their private key, and they must not make that public. So it tells us the certificate number, it tells us when it's valid, it tells us when it will expire, and you can go into all of these if you want to. But that is asymmetric encryption, uses two keys, asymmetric encryption, two keys. One is the private key, which is kept by the domain holder on their web server, and then kept privately, and then their public key is made public to enable secure communications between their website and the general public. Any questions on that, please? Let's just view the chat window. Any questions? Let me go back to new share and share the quiz now again. Let me just make sure. So can we see the quiz now, please? If we just put a yes in the chat window, so I make sure that we're back together. Okay, let's see. Yes, thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so we've answered that question and just done a bit over, we've just had a further discussion regarding symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Security controls on log data should reflect what? The organization's commitment to customer service, we know that's no. The local culture where the log data is stored, we know that's no. The price of the storage device or the sensitivity of the source device. So what this question is asking is that what should determine the security controls applied to log data? What should determine how stringent those security controls should be? And the answer is the sensitivity of the source device or the sensitivity of the source data, really. So if you've backed up data, critical data, then you want the logs of those backups to be protected stringently. So it's the sensitivity of the source data that has been backed up that should determine how strongly you secure the log data, the logs. So that is what that question is asking us there. What drives the security controls apply to any data, really? If it's personal data, for example, if it's financial data, if it's sensitive data, such as health records, then that would require stringent security controls, not only to the logs of the data if it's backed up, but also to the data itself. Now, this person works for Trifid Inc. as a security analyst, wants to send a message to several people and wants the recipients to know that the message definitely came from Bluca. What type of encryption should they use? They should use asymmetric encryption. Symmetric encryption is good for confidentiality, but not for integrity or for providing proof that the message actually came from this person. So asymmetric encryption helps us to provide that assurance that the message came from this person, from the sender rather than this person. What is used to ensure that configuration management activities are effective and that they are enforced? Is it inventory, baseline, identification, or verification and audit? The answer to that question lies in the first four letters of the question. XYZ is used to ensure. How do you ensure something? You verify and you audit it. But let me ask a question of us here. What does the baseline response mean? What is a baseline? What does that mean in IT or InfoSec? Baseline. Baseline? Answers in the question, in the chat window. Okay, let's see. Yep, a standard configuration. Standard configuration of what, please? Thank you, Tyrell. Standard configuration of what? Standard configuration of what's that? Okay. Of the configuration items. Now, if we're looking at, so you've typed out the configuration items now of the CIs, you've now typed out the configuration items. How would you break that down for a layperson? If you were given an example, I'll give an example, a baseline image. So in a company will have a standard build for all its laptops or desktops, where IT will say, everybody in the company, or the business will say, everybody in the company must have Windows 11 as the operating system. They must have Office 11 or Office 12. I don't even know what the latest version is. Everyone must have Office 11. Every laptop must have XYZ version of antivirus installed on it. Every machine must have this ransomware solution on it. So that is a baseline. And then what companies do is that they will install an image. They'll create an image. They'll create an image of a standard build, a baseline. They'll create a baseline image with all of those applications on it. And then they apply that image to all new computers. Every single new computer has that image installed on it. And then finance may say, for all finance team members, we also want XYZ application installed on that standard build, on that baseline image. Do we understand that? So that is what baseline is used for. The baseline is used to ensure that everyone has the same common build. A baseline is used to ensure that everyone has a common baseline build, that everyone has a common standard image, and then any other application that is needed, say the HR team needs to have an HR application installed on their computer, they will have the standard build, the baseline image, but they will then have, in addition to that, they may have an HR software installed because they work in HR. Any questions on that in the chat window? Yep, so baseline could be minimum operating system, Windows 8 Professional, allowed on their official computers. Minimum Windows 11, Windows 10. And then they name the application, the antivirus. They could say everyone has to have a Microsoft Edge, or they could say everyone has to have Google as their web browser, but they could say that anybody could use anything, that it's not important, that everyone can use their preferred browser. But the baseline is everything that is standard and applied to all computers within an organization. So verification and audit is used to ensure. When you see ensure, it must be verification, audit, enforcement. Okay, now let's see. Every document owned by this company, whether hard copy or electronic, has a clear 24-point word at the top and bottom. Only 3 words can be used: sensitive, proprietary, and public. This is an example of what? That's an example of labeling, where you label each document. You label each document according to different classifications that have been established in the classification policy or information security policy. Okay, now this person has done another paper. Right now, let's take a look at this one. Which of the following is an example of a something you know authentication factor? Something you know, it's definitely not a fingerprint or an iris scan or a user ID. It is a password. It's a password. Why is a user ID not something you know? Can anyone say why a user ID is not something you know? Why is a user ID not something you know? User ID is a common what? Yep, it's given to you, and IT know it for sure. If your organization has a common, naming convention for users, as in first letter of the first name and then surname, then of course everyone can guess your user ID. But your password is something that only you should know. So the answer there is B. Okay, XYZ works at an airport. There are red lines painted on the ground next to the runway, and they've been instructed that nobody can step or drive across a red line unless they request and get specific permission from the control tower. This is an example of a what control? That is an administrative control. It's not a physical control because there's no physical blockage there. There's no bollards or anything there to stop them from driving across the red line. So it's not a physical control. It's not a technical control because they're not using software or hardware to stop this person from driving across a red line, but it's an administrative control. Do we understand why that's not a physical control? Okay. Let's just see what's in the chat window. Yes, thank you. Okay, let's take a look. XYZ is a member of ISC2 and a data analyst for an organization. While they're reviewing user log data, Aphrodite discovers that another employee is violating the AUP and watching streaming videos during work hours. What should they do? What should they do? They should inform management rather than inform law enforcement, and they definitely shouldn't inform ISC2. And the best course of action is not to do nothing. So they raise the issue internally first, not externally. What is something or someone that poses a risk to an organization or asset? It's a threat. A threat is a person or thing that poses a risk to an organization or asset. Can a user be a threat? An internal user be a threat? Yes, you said yes. Can an internal system be a threat? Can an internal system be a threat? An internal system that is configured securely, can it be a threat? Okay, we've got some people saying yes. Does anybody think an internal system that has been configured securely, can that be a threat to the organizations, to another asset? No. Okay. Anyone else say no? Can it be a threat to the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of another system? Okay, so it can actually be a threat in that to the availability of another system, in that if a major component that another system is dependent on fails, then that would affect the availability of the main system. So an internal system can be a threat, even if it's been configured securely. So a threat is something or someone that poses a risk to an organization. And what is a control? Again, a control is anything that is used to reduce the risk. So what is a control to reduce the risk of someone walking away with a computer or a laptop within an organization? What is a control? Let's type a few controls. So you have your laptops left on desks at lunchtime. What is a control that could be used to reduce the risk of someone just walking in and taking a laptop away? Controls. Let's take a look at the chat window. Any controls. So you said physical, you've asked the question, AA, physical controls. What, any controls. What controls can you think of that may reduce the risk? Security guard, laptop locks, fantastic. Electronic tag, physical lock, cable locks, locked cupboards, CCTV camera. Yep, so thank you, but you've all got it there. Reception, receptionist. All of these are controls that could be used to reduce the risk of laptops being taken away if they're left unattended at lunch time. Okay, and I've got this thing here, but I'll answer the question after the break. I've seen someone say that is my weak area, so I just need to take a look and discuss that with you once we've nearly come to the end of this workshop to see exactly what areas we were talking about when you said, when you mentioned that, so we can just talk through any area that you deem are your weak areas. The EU law that grants legal protections to individual human privacy of EU residents, not EU citizens, EU residents, is called what? That's called the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, which applies to the personal data of all EU residents. So if you're a bank abroad, a bank in Nigeria, where I originate from, for example, and you process the data of any EU resident, whether they are Nigerian by birth or by origin or by anything, if they live in the EU and you process their data, then you're obliged to comply with the EU GDPR with regards to their data. So that is important. It's important that if we work in organizations, work in global organizations abroad, we need to be aware of that regulation, that we don't say it doesn't apply to us because we only process the data of our citizens that live abroad, because the rule is it requires you to comply with the processing laws regarding any EU resident, not citizen, resident, anyone living in the EU, whether they're, citizens of the EU or not. So that's so important. For which of the following assets is integrity probably the most important security aspect? One frame of a streaming video, the file that contains passwords used to authenticate users, the color scheme of a marketing website, or software that checks the spelling of product descriptions for a retail website. Of course, that is the file that contains passwords used to authenticate users. So it's so important that that is not altered with, that it's not actually accessed by unauthorized persons. For which of the following systems would the security concept of availability probably be most important? So the previous question was on integrity. Which one of these needs to be available at all times? Medical systems that store patient data, retail records of past transactions, online streaming of camera feeds that display historical works of art in art museums around the world, medical systems that monitor patient conditions in an intensive care unit. The answer to that is D, medical systems that monitor patient conditions in an intensive care unit. Their records need to be available 24/7 clearly. Yeah, so that is the most critical out of all those. Remember, we've said, so for anyone who thinks it may have been B, yes, it's important that we retain retail records of past transactions, but remember we said that the most important thing for anything to do with work, information security, IT, whatever it is, work related, most important thing is about the protection of humans and their safety. So it's not just about systems that store patient data. The most important records that need to be available are medical systems that monitor patient conditions in an intensive care unit. What kind of document is the ISC2 Common Book of Knowledge? C-book. What sort of material is it? It's a standard. It's not a policy, it's not enforced, it's not a procedure manual, it's not a law, it's a standard that is used throughout the InfoSec industry. What sort of controls are bollards? Those are actually physical controls. A bollard, that is those sort of large pieces of metal that are built into the ground to prevent a vehicle or a car or lorry from entering an area or driving past a certain point. That is a physical control. Physical control. Okay, thank you. A vendor sells a particular OS, operating system. In order to deploy the OS securely on different platforms, they publish several sets of instructions on how to install it, depending on which platform. That is an example of a procedure manual, really. Step-by-step instructions. That is what a procedure manual is, a procedure. A software firewall is an application that runs on a device and prevents specific types of traffic from entering that device. This is a type of what sort of control? That is a technical control. It's not a physical control. It's not an administrative or passive control. So it's a technical control. XYZ is an ISC2 member who works for the Trifid Corporation as the data manager. They need a new firewall solution and are asked to recommend a product for Trifid to acquire and implement. Their cousin works for a firewall vendor. That vendor happens to make the best firewall available. What should they do? They should actually disclose the relationship, but recommend the vendor product. So they can't simply recommend the product without disclosing their relationship because of conflict of interest rules. But because it is one of the best products out there, they still need to recommend the product. They can't ask to be recused from their assignment because they are, they work for the organization and but they simply can't just say, I don't want to make any recommendations if it's the best product out there. They simply tell the truth. I'm related to this person, but I do believe that this product is one of the best out there compared to, and they also provide comparisons. But they must disclose that relationship. Okay, let's take a look at the next question. This person is a security practitioner tasked with ensuring that laptops are not stolen from the office. What sort of security control would probably be best for this purpose? Physical controls. We've talked about those because laptops are tangible objects. This city wants to ensure that all of its citizens are protected from malware, so they create a rule that anyone caught creating and launching malware will receive a fine and go to jail. What kind of rule is this? That is a law, as we know. It's not a procedure or a standard or a policy. They've created a rule. A rule is a legal mandate. This person is setting up security for home network and they decide to configure MAC address filtering on the router so that only specific devices will be allowed to join the network. This is an example of what? Of what sort of control? What sort of control is this? It's actually a technical control rather than a, but I wanted to ask another question. That's a technical control, but I wanted to ask the question. Thanks to everyone who's answered technical straight away. But I wanted to ask the question, do we remember what a MAC address is? A MAC address? I mentioned it earlier in the workshop. Unique ID on a network interface card adapter. So I don't like using acronyms that we use in the IT and InfoSec industry, Toyin. So rather than write NIC adapter, I'll spell it out on a network interface card adapter. So every device that has a network card in it to access the internet, basically. If you need to access the internet, then that device has to have a network card in it or network interface card. So that network interface card will always have a unique MAC address, media access control address, MAC address. And that question is asking us that which sort of control is MAC address filtering on a router? And that is a technical control. And I always advise people that when you receive a new router, some of the things that you can do to keep yourself secure, I believe there's also another workshop which may actually be hidden on the Ladderback Downs website that I did about 2 years ago again. you always try and configure that router. You change the default admin password, because if it is so basic that everyone knows the default admin password for your ISP, or cyber criminals at least know the default admin password, then they could readily take over that router. So that's one of the things you can do. Another thing you can do is to configure MAC address filtering, whereby you simply, on your router, whitelist all the MAC addresses of the devices in your home, so that only those devices can access your router, can use your router. But one of the disadvantages of doing that is that if you've got a large family, each time someone buys a device, you have to whitelist their MAC address on the router. You have to add their MAC address to the router. If you're someone that has friends over often, each time they come over, you need to whitelist, add their MAC address, their device's MAC address to the router, so that it can actually, to the router's routing table rather, so that it can actually allow access to the internet. So MAC address filtering isn't really, a recommended control for a home-based router, but it is a technical control. This company publishes a policy that states that all staff will act in a manner that protects health and human safety. The security office is tasked with writing a detailed set of processes. What is this detailed set of processes called? It's called a procedure manual, step-by-step guide. This person is a member of ISC2 and a security analyst for Trifid Corporation. During an audit, they're asked whether Trifid is currently following a particular security practice. This Olaf knows that the company is not adhering to that standard in that particular situation, but that saying this to the auditors will reflect poorly on the company. What should they do? Should they tell the auditors the truth, ask supervisors for guidance, ask ISC2 for guidance, or lie to the auditors? You never lie to the auditors, you simply tell the truth. And telling the truth may not always pay you in the way that you expect it to pay. But at the end of the day, it still pays. That's what I found. Integrity always pays, even though it may not pay as you expect it to. You always tell the truth, whether it's to regulators, whether it's to auditors, just speak the truth. Because if you lie for an organization and you get caught out, you're on your own. No organization will admit to having told you to lie for them. A system that collects transactional information and stores it in a record in order to show which users performed which actions is an example of providing what? Is it non-repudiation, multi-factor authentication, biometrics, or privacy? And that's definitely non-repudiation, which is the concept that users cannot deny they have performed transactions that they did, in fact, conduct. A system that keeps a record of user transactions or an audit trail provides non-repudiation. So the user can't say, I did not do this, because a record has been kept. A log has been made of those actions. In risk management concepts, a what is something a security manager might need to protect. Is it a vulnerability, an asset, a threat, or likelihood? It's definitely an asset. They need to protect an asset, remove or reduce vulnerabilities, reduce threats, reduce the likelihood of a compromise. An organization publishes a strategic overview of the company's intent to secure all the data the company possesses This document is signed by senior management. What sort of document is this? It's a policy if it's signed by senior management. Who approves the incident response policy? Anyone know the answer to that? Who approves the incident response policy? Okay, someone says B. Yep, because it's a policy. And they're accountable for policy. So yes, senior management have to approve that. When should a business continuity plan be activated? Be activated. So that must be activated by a senior manager who would most likely be the incident response manager, or they would be the person that the incident response manager would need to speak to say, okay, we're experiencing this. What should we do? And then the senior manager would give the instruction to invoke the business continuity plan, to activate the plan and to go out and carry out the plan. So it's when senior management actually says, yes, it's time to invoke this plan. Oh, sorry, I think I may have gone past. What is the goal of business continuity efforts? And that is to keep critical business functions operational during a business interruption. It's not to ensure that all IT systems continue to operate. It's to ensure that all critical business functions. IT disaster recovery efforts is about ensuring systems are promptly recovered. But in terms of business continuity, you're trying to keep the critical business functions operating during a business interruption. What sort of interruptions might a business continuity plan be prepared to address? What sort of interruptions? In the chat window, please, what sort of interruptions might a business continuity plan be prepared for? Business interruptions. Fire outbreak at HQ, okay. Anything else? Power outage, cyber attack, yes. Was waiting for another one actually. Natural disaster, any other ones? Thank you. Any other one? What about a pandemic? So for years, we've been talking when training, or I've been talking when training for, you know, for ISC Square workshops or anything information security. For years, I've been talking about, you know, a pandemic because of the swine flu and bird flu thing that we had in the UK, at least, years ago, not knowing that COVID would come along. So I've been involved in business management teams where we've often been asked to provide our business continuity plans and then contribute towards business continuity plan discussions in a committee. You know, year on year, we'd just make sure that our plans were up to speed, making sure that we'd identified all our critical functions, not systems. No, a pandemic is not part of a natural disaster. A pandemic is different. A natural disaster could be a hurricane or an earthquake or things like that, but a pandemic is a pandemic. So, yeah, you wouldn't view a pandemic, you know, hurricane, flood, things like that. That's what they refer to. But a pandemic, they usually use, you know, I mean, they definitely plan differently with regards to a natural disaster, because a natural disaster may be something that affects a certain place, you know, a certain town. there's a hurricane in a certain town or in a certain county or in a certain state. But a pandemic could be a global thing. So when we talk about a pandemic, yeah, we're talking about making plans for a pandemic where the majority of your IT team may suddenly become unavailable. A natural disaster, you could actually have, you know, a whole town affected by a fire, but you could then have a team in a different function who's trained and everything in a different state or country that is trained to take over. Let's say you're a 24/7 organization, for example. So you have the follow the sun model where your IT function, you know, I mean, at 9 o'clock UK time, they then hand over to the US. At 10 o'clock US time or 9 o'clock US time, they hand over to Asia XYZ. So in the event of a natural disaster in one country or town, they could hand over to another state very promptly. But when there's a pandemic that's affecting everywhere globally, it's not as simple as simply saying, okay, the US takes over, you know, and they will do everything on that, because every single country may be affected. So business continuity is about trying to ensure that you plan for the eventuality that a business interruption, in the event that a business interruption occurs, that the most critical business functions are able to continue to operate. In some cases, that may mean that some less important functions don't operate. Like during COVID, what is the most critical function that all hospitals had to make sure continued to operate? What is their most important function in the health service in all hospitals? Can someone tell us what the most important function or service is in a hospital? A guess? A guess, most important function in a hospital? Yes, the A&E service. So all hospitals had to make sure that their A&E, accident and emergency health unit, critical care, whatever you want to call it, that they remained open. Non-essential surgeries were cancelled. Fracture clinics, for example, were cancelled. But A&E, the most critical function, had to remain open. And so when an organization, when a health service or a hospital is planning business continuity, the most critical function that they need to focus on as a priority is how do we make sure that our A&E services remain open 24/7. Keep critical business functions operational. That is the goal of business continuity efforts. Whereas IT disaster recovery, let's take a look. What is the overall objective of an IT disaster recovery thing here? That's the next question, I believe. Let's go down. Okay. Overall goal, preserve critical business functions, return to normal, full operations, save money, enhance public perception of the organization. It's usually to return the organization to normal full operations. So what is the difference? And they've actually not used IT disaster recovery. So we're talking about the entire business now. What is the difference between business continuity and disaster recovery then? What is the difference between those two objectives? IT disaster recovery, thank you for that question. IT disaster recovery is restoring IT systems to normal. So that would involve not only dealing with the outage, it won't only involve dealing with the outage and what's affected the systems, but it would also involve ensuring that the business returns to normal, that those systems return to normal. So let's say there's an outage of IT systems on one site. That is a disaster. That's a disaster. The site has become unavailable for some reason, whatever the reason, cyber attack or systems malfunctioning, whatever. So they decide that they're going to actually migrate and switch on the systems, the backup systems in another data center. That is stage one of the IT disaster recovery process. But the process is not completed until they've resolved the issue in the primary data center, and then they've now reverted back to that data center. They've reverted things to how they were before the disaster struck. So that is IT disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is about recovering the systems or the business back to the state it was before the incident or the event occurred. Whereas business continuity is about trying to ensure that the business, the most critical systems and the critical business operations continue to run during an interruption. Do you understand the difference? So one is about continuing operations during an incident or an event. One is about not only continuing to run and recovering the systems, but it's also about restoring things to how they were before the disaster struck. Anyone unclear about that? Please ask me to repeat myself if we're not sure of what the differences are. So business continuity, critical business functions and services. So those critical business functions could include payroll services, making sure that everyone continues to get paid during that business interruption. And in many cases, business continuity also relies on IT systems being available, because that example that I've just given there, ensuring that everyone gets paid during a business interruption. But a company could say, worst case scenario, we would just revert to pen and paper if it's a small company and make sure everyone gets paid. If the company has a rostering system or a timekeeping system that they normally use to determine everyone's pay for the month, they could say, okay, you know what? For each month, we're just going to, whilst this disaster continues, we're just going to make, not make use of that rostering system. We're just going to make sure that we pay everyone. They could say, we're going to pay everyone an average of what they've been paid over the last year. And then when the disaster is over, or the interruption or the event is over, we can then start recouping any overpayments or paying off any underpayments. But it's about continuing the business, critical functions of the business during an outage, during an event or an interruption. That is what business continuity is focused on. Disaster recovery is about not only trying to restore the systems promptly, but also trying to ensure that they recover the systems to the way that they were before the outage occurred. Okay. An attacker outside the organization attempts to gain access to the firm's internal files. This is an example of what? It's an example of an intrusion. When they're trying to intrude into an organization. You are reviewing log data from a router. There's an entry that shows a user sent traffic through the router at 11:45 a.m. local time yesterday. This is an example of a what? An event, which is an observable occurrence within the IT environment. So that's an event. I'm trying to race through as many of these as possible. What is the risk associated with delaying resumption? Delaying resumption of full normal operations after a disaster. Why is it, what is the risk associated with delaying resuming normal operations after a disaster? Well, the risk is that you may end up running operations in your secondary data center for extended periods. And that could be more costly, and it could also result in a loss of data integrity, whereby if you've got your alternate systems in data center B and everyone's been configured to upload data onto the systems in the data center B, when you now recover those systems, there may be some data integrity issues when B wants to sync with the primary data center, with the databases in the primary data center that went down. Could be corruption issues, data corruption issues. So there's an impact of running alternate operations for extended periods, including costs. Let's look at a few more questions, and then I'll take questions that we may have. Network traffic originating from outside an organization might be admitted to the internal IT environment or blocked at the perimeter by a what? That is by a firewall, which is one of the first questions we asked ourselves today. All of the following are typically perceived as drawbacks to biometric systems, except for what? So lack of accuracy is not perceived as a drawback of biometric systems, because biometric authentication is pretty accurate. Fingerprints are generally more accurate than a signature, for example. Potential privacy concerns, they are, those are genuine concerns. People are concerned about, retina scans. Lack of accuracy, people are concerned about lack of accuracy. Retention of physiological data past the point of employment, yes, people may be concerned actually that our data is being retained past or longer than necessary, breaching regulations. Legality, there are questions. There are often questions around legality, but lack of accuracy is less of a concern, because biometrics, like who you are, I mean, your fingerprints rarely change. They're more accurate than you sign, well, at least than my signature, because I can't, I could never sign the same signature to save my life. I haven't got a signature at all. So this person works as a DBA for Trifid Inc. They're allowed to add or delete users, but not allowed to read or modify the data in the database itself. When they log onto the system, an access control list checks to determine which permissions Prachi has. In this situation, what is Prachi, the DBA? Are they the subject, the rule, the file, or the object? What are they? Any answers? I know we're nearly finished now, and I know that we're tired, but any answers as to what Trachi actually is? Let's take a look. Are they the rule? Are they the... Yep, they're definitely the subject. They're not the rule. They're not the file or the object. Okay, what is a record of something that has occurred? Biometric, law, log, or firewall? That is clear, that is a log. Which of the following roles does not typically require privileged account access? The security administrator, data entry professional, systems administrator, or the help desk technician? Which of those doesn't really require privileged account access? Any help? Any questions? That is not the help desk technician. It's definitely the data entry professional. The help desk technician will most likely need privileged access to some systems to help users who raise questions, but someone just entering data doesn't need privileged access. They just need access to, they may need write access to some databases if there's someone that is actually entering data into a database, but not privileged access. Let's just move down a bit. So Trina and Doug both work at Trifid. Doug is having trouble logging into the network. Trina offers to log in for Doug using Trina's credentials so that Doug can get some work done. What is the problem with this? Well, we all know that that's the problem. Anything either of them do will be attributed to Tina because it's her login. So again, we've said that previously. Make sure you don't share your username or password with anyone, or password essentially with anyone. Which of these is an example of a physical access control mechanism? We've got software-based firewall at the perimeter of the network, a lock on a door, network switches that filter according to MAC addresses, a process that requires two people to act at the same time to perform the function. And it's definitely a lock on a door. That is a physical access control. Tequila works for a government agency. All data in the agency is assigned a particular sensitivity level called a classification. Each person is assigned a clearance level, which determines the classification of data each person can access. What is the access control model being implemented in Tequila's agency? So all data in the agency is assigned a particular sensitivity level called a classification, and each person is assigned a clearance level, which determines the classification of data each person can access. So what is that? And you've got to remember that this is what applies in every single civil service. So security clearance, you may have DV security clearance or SC clearance, or you may have CTC, I think it is, or baseline security clearance. So for each of those classifications, you can access certain levels of data. And that's an example of mandatory access control. It's mandatory because you're not being provided with access based on your role, but on your class. What class have you, what classification label have you got assigned to you? Are you security cleared, DB cleared, CTC, or baseline security cleared? And you could have a head of information security who is SC cleared, for example. And they won't be assigned, and they may not be assigned as many privileges as somebody who's the PA to the head of terrorism. The PA of the head of terrorism may require DV clearance because they may gain access to highly sensitive information. So it's not based on roles, it's based on mandatory access controls. Now let's take a look at the next question. This person logs onto a system and opens a document file. In this example, they are the subject. They're not the object, the process, or the software. They're not the object, the process, or the software. Okay. All visitors to a secure facility should be escorted. That is the answer to that question, which is obvious. At this person's place of work, the perimeter of the property is surrounded by a fence. There's a gate with a guard at the entrance. All inner doors only admit personnel with badges and cameras, and they monitor the hallway. Sensitive data and media are kept in safes when not in use. This is an example of defense in depth, multiple layers of defense. So that is clear. Handel is a senior manager at this company and is in charge of implementing a new access control scheme for the company. They want to ensure that employers who are assigned to new positions in the company do not retain whatever access they had in their old positions. Which method should Handel select? So they want to ensure that employees who are assigned to new positions do not retain whatever access they had in their old positions. Now, again, we haven't mentioned this today, but I've always talked about the need for role-based access control based on the fact that if you assign privileges individually or permissions individually to a subject, rather, not a data subject, to a subject, to me, I join a new company, then you give me permissions to access this file, you give me access to that file. When I move, if I move to another department, you may inadvertently still leave me with my old permissions and just add different permissions, new permissions to my already existing permissions, which I don't need anymore. And that's called escalated privileges. So instead of assigning individual privileges to me, if you add me to a role, operational risk, team role on the system, and then you apply permissions to that and privileges to that role, operational risk manager or whatever. When I move to another department, all you need to do is remove me from that operational risk role and team on the system and put me in my new team. And then that reduces the risk of you leaving me with old permissions that you've assigned to me, 50 old permissions, rather than removing me from a single role and adding me to a new role.